So today we're just going to walk through 5 things. That's it. So I've allowed 90 minutes because it depends on A, I didn't know what the size of the audience was. B, I didn't know who was in which roles. And also wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for questions or attention should we need it. So, excuse me. So today is all about what mentoring is and what it's not. It's about exploring the difference between mentoring, coaching, and training, looking at the benefits of mentoring and exploring the 5 core elements of what an effective mentor will do. And it's developing an effective mentoring relationship. So we're going to unpack each of those items in turn. What do you think makes a good mentor? Give me some perspective, some ideas of what you think makes a good mentor.
Good listener.
Sharing experiences.
Good communicator.
Develop a rapport with.
Communicator.
Someone you can trust.
Understanding. Empathy.
Ability to coach.
Well, that's an interesting one. Okay. What else?
Understanding needs of your, person you're mentoring.
Someone that's non-judgmental, so fairly neutral.
So neutral. Okay, some really good descriptions there. I think that probably wraps up the session, to be perfectly honest. You seem to have it all under control. But let's explore and unpack a little bit more then. So thank you for those. We'll come on to those in just a second. So what actually is mentoring? What does it look like, feel like? So what we're going to do is we're going to do some work in groups. So we'll divide you into some breakout rooms. And what I want you to do in your rooms is think about the concept of mentoring, coaching, and training. And what I'm interested in is how would you define each? Where do you see the similarities and where do you see the differences? And when should or could each be used? Gavin, lead us through how you define number one then. How would you define each? Lead us through your perspective on that one.
So training, we spoke about the fact that it was often a specific or bespoke skill or knowledge to get a job completed, so something for a specific role. And the fact that it can, so that's kind of that for training. For coaching, we spoke about the fact that it was upgrading a current skill, and that mentoring really was about a sharing of knowledge and experience and was more focused around soft skills.
Okay. Anybody have anything different to add to that one?
The mentor, I think we kind of did labour quite a bit on the whole neutrality of that role. So it's generally, because often mentors are sometimes outside the organisation.
Could be, yeah.
So, it was more about having someone impartial, someone neutral, someone that could be a sounding board, maybe an information provider. So someone that you could go to and say, how could I do that? Where would I find that? These are people that maybe could support with that. Obviously the listening thing and everything, we talked about it, but a little bit of counselling perhaps if there was, if it's somebody's, really struggling with something, maybe they could give them a bit of wisdom, but only, I guess it's more guided by the mentee than a coaching role, because in a coaching role, that is more about leadership, it's about line management, it's about empowerment and all these things, whereas the mentor was more about being guided by the needs of that mentee.
Okay, I think the only thing to be careful in that description is the counselling piece. Counselling typically focuses on the past, whereas coaching and mentoring typically focus on the future. So it is very much in the future, whereas counselling, and actually you can end up, opening a can of worms if you try and counsel somebody and you're not trained to do it. It is a very specialist skill that we don't do. We wouldn't advocate unless you've been trained to, that you would go there either. So always see counselling as something that's dealing with the past, and coaching and mentoring as dealing with the future. So all of the other things that you mentioned, Caroline, absolutely, yeah, totally agree. In terms of the mentoring, the one watch out for mentors and coaches is getting stuck with people's, for want of a better term, the baggage that they bring can influence how they see the world, and we're not qualified necessarily to handle things that impact them from the past. We can help them to think about the future. We can help them to look at how they might approach the future differently, but dealing with issues or unresolved matters from the past is a much more specialized skill.
Okay.
And you'll know it because people will show signs of stress. They'll show signs of perhaps frustration, maybe anger, and they'll start to feel like things that you're uncomfortable with. And if you're uncomfortable, that's a good indicator you've got somebody that's got some stuff that they need to unpack with an expert, with somebody more specially trained than what we generally are. Now, you might have counselling skills within the team. I think counselling skills exist within the people team, don't they, Catherine?
Yes.
So there are skills within the business, but it is a limited tool set, I think. Okay, thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Caroline. Anybody else got anything to add to the?
I suppose the only thing that we discussed, I was with Gavin as well, was the measurement of, I suppose, success in some respects, whereas training and coaching potentially is a lot easier because in order to pass a specific course, you need a mark out of whatever it might be, 19 out of 20, etc. Similar to coaching, you can probably see, certainly in our business, results coming through, whether it's sales records being smashed or, a certain number of, large meals being sold, etc. Whereas mentoring is perhaps a little more tricky to kind of measure success, because there's not really a number that you can associate, that you can put to it. And if someone perhaps has been mentored and has done the coaching and training, but there isn't a role for that person to go in, it's probably difficult to assess the results of that.
Possibly. And I think the key here, Nick, is it always comes back to the goal, and the goal of the individual, the mentee. What do they want to get out of it? And that's ultimately, if we can help them to achieve that, whether that's in terms of preparation for their next role, promotion opportunities, whether it's a different experience that they want to get or obtain, then actually that becomes the measure of success. So it's not necessarily a business measure in the way that you described them, but they are measures in which you go, did we get you to where you wanted to get to? And if the answer is yes, then that's a win. And that's a mindset for a mentor, is to recognize you're there to serve the mentee, they're not there for your benefit, you're there for their benefit. In much the same way as a coach is. The difference is it's about the clarity of goal, the clarity of where they want to get to, what makes that important for them. And you're back into a voodoo loop in many respects in terms of making sure they understand, what it is to get there. So you kind of hybrid into a little bit of coaching in terms of that goal defining piece. So what do they want from this, and how do we help them to get there? What help do they need from you? What access to people, what access to knowledge, insight, or even sharing some of our history and our scars of the past in terms of helping them to get there, but ultimately align your win success to their requirement, what they wanted from it in terms of that. So if you're preparing your next generation of managers and leaders, that's huge, but it doesn't quantify itself in pounds, shilling and pence. Okay, well, let's move on to similarities and differences then. Stuart, your team, what did you talk about with regards to that one?
We spoke I guess we thought that mentoring and coaching have probably had more similarities than training and the other two elements. Whereas, although you can see some differences as well. So I think Gabby mentioned on coaching is about upgrading knowledge. We also thought it was about refreshing, recapping knowledge. So we felt there was some crossover between mentoring, but we did see that training stood out on its own, with it being more task focused, knowledge based, and almost a starting point. And you wanted to get from A to get to B in terms of a knowledge point. So as mentoring and coaching, we thought had more of the similarities.
Okay. Did you see any particular differences between mentoring and coaching? Any things you'd call out in particular?
Yes, I think as a mentor, you don't need to be a subject matter expert. In fact, I think in some ways it can be good if you don't have any experience in that subject at all. Whereas I think as a coach, potentially, to be a successful coach, you would need to guide people through that subject matter in the right way. Yeah, I think that was one of the things we thought was a difference, really.
Anybody else had anything else around the difference and the similarities?
I think we just talked about in our group about for mentoring, the mentee would set the agenda around what they want from that meeting, whereas if you were more in kind of training or coaching, you're setting the agenda a little bit more around what they need to get from that. If it's somebody new, you would be setting the agenda around training. Similar with coaching, you might have identified an area that you want to coach them on, so it's more led by kind of the person rather than the trainee. So they were kind of the similarities and differences we picked up on.
We touched on the fact that mentoring is probably going to be one-to-one.
Yep.
Whereas coaching and training can be one-to-one, but more often than not, it's probably with other people or individual.
Lee, your team, what did you come up with in terms of when you should or could use each of them?
Training, we said, would be at the start of somebody's journey in terms of them new position, wanting to learn a new skill. Coaching, we would see as once they're on the journey to improve what they already know, so they can deliver to a higher standard. And then mentoring would probably be support and guidance. So when they're looking for a fresh start altogether, I guess a different role, or they want to develop their skills even further. So training would be the starting point, coaching would be the middle, then mentoring closer to the end, but also in the middle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good way to look at it. And I think much depends on the individual in terms of where they are in that career path, and what their aspirations are. So if I've got some aspirations to be in the commercial team, then actually you or Stuart would be good people for us to tap into from a mentoring standpoint. In the same way, if it was a marketing perspective, Vicky or even members of Vicky's team might be people that we'd want to be mentored by in order to prepare us for that next opportunity, if that's a direction of travel that we wanted to go. So I think that all kind of makes sense from my perspective. Let's unpack that a little bit more. So in terms of the different approaches, there's kind of this continuum, I suppose you'd call it, that ranges from directive to empowering. And I think you've all kind of spotted the fact that, training kind of sits right there in terms of not just left of centre, where it is about, showing them, telling them. It is about more directive, and that typically comes when somebody is new to role, new in terms of a particular job or task that they've not done before. So they might go through a level of training in order to do that. Then as you tend towards some mentoring, and then coaching is probably at the other end of this continuum, where you're looking at a more empowering model. And I think, the thing about coaching, you don't need to be a subject matter expert on. In fact, we coach people in our organization. We coach people all the time. We know nothing necessarily about their role, but what we are is the master of great questions. So if we can ask a question that causes you to think, then actually we can help people move forward, move in the right direction. We can even help them to develop a plan in terms of what they would do about it. And I think, you know, how you described it earlier, Stuart, you were kind of talking about coaching and mentoring. I think they were the opposite way round. I think coaching, you are bringing subject matter expertise to bear. You are bringing your experience, your knowledge, and, you know, where you've done well, where you've not done so well. So mentoring would step in there where you're providing them access to either people, access to information, access to resources, access to knowledge in order to help them to do the job that they're trying to do that more effectively. And that could be current role, it could be potentially building them up for a future role. So this is about helping them to level up, but it's using your subject matter expertise in which to do that. Not telling or necessarily showing. And you might flip between coaching and mentoring very often because you might want to ask some questions in order to test their knowledge. And it's easy to see how these become blurred lines between the two, because, you know, I couldn't mentor people in your organization where subject matter expertise is required. What I could do is mentor people where a leadership development approach was required. Because I have been there, I've seen that, I've done it, I've got the scars to prove it. And I have a particular perspective in terms of that. In the same way, somebody wanting to move up a level within Welcome Break, many of you are positioned to be able to mentor them. Now, when you're mentoring somebody who's from a, you know, where it's a specific skill and a specific role with a set of requirements in terms of knowledge, maybe training, even formal education, maybe some qualifications required in order to do certain things, then providing they've reached that threshold, then you can start to mentor them in the role and give them access to opportunities in order to test them and create the feedback loops that go with it. So I think for me, and remember, you know, we see coaching as a purist thing. It is simply about helping another individual with the way they think and therefore the actions that they take as a result of that. Mentoring is about bringing subject matter expertise and skills to bear in order to help them improve. Because you've got that knowledge, you've been there, seen it, done it, got the t-shirt. You comfortable with that, Stuart?
Yeah, I am comfortable with it. It does make sense. And in fact, as I was talking about coaching and saying that you needed a subject matter expert, I was actually questioning it in my own mind. But I do think you could have either or. It depends if it's a specific skill that you're being coached on. I do think in some situations you would need a subject matter expert. But I also accept that coaching could be far wider and you don't need. It depends on what the topic is, doesn't it? It depends on what you're coaching somebody on.
Absolutely. And I think, remember, my definition is very much in pure coaching, whereas actually, if you are, and sports is a good way to look at this, where actually I would observe your technique in something, I would provide you with some feedback, I would get you to have another go, and then we'd either go, you've got it, you've not got it, or actually tweak it a little bit. And you're actually using some subject matter expertise in order to level them up. So I think it's just around a level of understanding, are we in pure coaching, helping another person to think and therefore be more effective, or are we subject matter experts where you are absolutely right, you would provide some observation and feedback, you give them some support, you give them some feedback, and ask them or invite them to do it again and again and again until they could do that properly. And I think they're clearly, you know, I imagine baristas have, certainly in the Starbucks arena, they have a blend of forgive me, a combination of coaching and a combination of subject matter expertise to observe what they do, how they do it, and then play that back to them until they get that particular coffee right.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think it's about recognizing the difference. The key thing here is we're not training and we're not telling and showing if we are playing at the empowering end of this continuum. And therefore, mentoring, you're using knowledge, expertise, and experience, as well as all the other list of things around trusting and listening and all those things around that. You will always flip into coaching from time to time, because you're going to ask them some questions to cause them to think, because if you keep giving them the answers, that's not mentoring. So there has to be some discovery, there has to be some research, there has to be some work on the part of the mentee in order to earn their stripes in terms of that. So coming back to then, what is mentoring? Well, there is a formal definition that we can use and lean on, which is a form of employee development whereby a trusted and respected person, the mentor, uses their experience to offer guidance, encouragement, support to another person, the mentee. Which, when we talked about what is mentoring at the very beginning, most of those words appear in terms of the things that you came up with. And that definition comes from the Chartered Management Institute. So that's their definition. So the key here is trusted and respected. They're using experience to offer guidance, encouragement, support to another person. In other words, you are going to help your mentee avoid landmines, avoid the mistakes that you made before in order to fast track them through that process. Help them to understand perhaps the learning that you got by going the journey that you took, but actually we're helping them to avoid some landmines. Let's just whiz through some of the key benefits then of mentoring. So to the mentee, I think you captured this. It's about development of new skills and knowledge, not acquisition of new skills and knowledge, but the development of them. How do they take what they've learned in either a classroom or a formal learning environment and turn that into actual practical application of what they've learned? It provides greater organizational understanding. And I think this is probably one of the areas that is probably undervalued by mentors in terms of the value they bring. The experience that you have as a mentor, as somebody who's been in the organization for a while, how things work, how we get things done, who we talk to. Somebody like Stuart and Lee who cross, and maybe you, Nick, as well, cross the organization with the roles that you do, you're exposed to some of the intricacies of how each department kind of sees things. And therefore, that insight for somebody who wants to get something done or move something forward can be tremendous, because we all know that we can get in our own way and get stuck thinking, well, I don't know who does this, and spend hours, days, weeks trying to work out who that might be, and happily stumble maybe across the answer. And that might be more true of those in the regions, because they are, have less access. They're almost like the frog at the bottom of the well. When they look up, they only ever see they're part of the organization, whereas others that are exposed beyond that get to see more of the organization and therefore have a greater insight to share. And that, of course, leads into improved networks to support success of others. Think about the LEAD program in particular, or even the HYPO program. You're getting access to other people in the organization, people that you don't work with day to day, and there's great value in sharing and appreciating what each other brings to the party. Let's have a look at to the mentor. Well, to the mentor, it's about the opportunity to practice and develop their own skills. One of the reasons we encourage Catherine in particular to put mentoring in with the LEAD program, and it already exists with your high potential group anyway, but is it causes you as mentors to have to dig out the tools that we shared with you over last year and at least remind yourself of the language, if nothing else, because your mentee who's going through that, particularly those coming through the lead program, need to know that this tool set is what the business is committed to, is what the business is wanting the organization to use and get value from. And the greatest way of doing that is having to dig that out and share it back with the people that you're mentoring. It's one of the most powerful ways of reminding yourself that you know your stuff, that you know what you know, the experiences and tool sets that you've gained. Increases confidence and organizational visibility because you're being exposed to more people, you're adding value and you're giving something back to the organization, particularly your colleagues who are the ones that need your experience the most. And that's about the contribution. You know, it's about giving your skills and knowledge back to the organization. But the organization, of course, is going to benefit from all of that, because you're going to see people that feel invested in, that feel like people care about them and are interested in their development, are more likely to stick around. What better way than transferring skills and knowledge? I'm not sure whether you're aware of a statistic. I think Catherine absolutely will be, but if you go on a formal training course and you do not apply that knowledge, you will lose 90% of it within a week. Now, that's a hell of an expensive training course if you're going to lose most of it within a week. And that presupposes you choose not to apply it. And of course, in any program that you will attend, there's a lot of information that you are provided with, and working out which bits you're going to use at which point is really tough. So actually causing the mentee to work with their training, causing the mentor to apply what they've learned and, you know, suffered with, failed at, learnt, overcome, built some resilience around some of that stuff will help their mentee to tread that path much more smoothly. It's going to lead to increased performance and productivity because you're leveling people up at a faster rate than any formal training program will do. And, you know, it's a cost-effective way of developing and leveling up your team, because they're learning from somebody who knows their stuff. They're learning from people who have trod this path. They've done it before. And of course, you've got customers at the end of this, whether they be actual customers that are spending money over your threshold or internal customers, but they're going to be dealing with more knowledgeable, more competent people, you know, that the staff that they're working with are confident with customers, and it increases their own confidence. When you know what you're talking about, you just feel much more accomplished in the role that you do, and you're going to deliver that better, more consistent service experience. And of course, we want to be a world-class team, right? So this is integral to making that come alive. I'm assuming, unless you've got any challenges, then you're comfortable with this stuff. And we'll have a Q&A at the end. And obviously, if there's anything that you want to ask, anything you want to share, anything you want to delve into more deeply, we can do that. So let's just think about how people learn. Has anybody come across this concept of 70-20-10 before? This is some research that was done back in early 80s. It's popularized by a guy called Charles Jennings, who talks a lot about this topic called 70-20-10. And what it is talks about how we learn. So 10% of the knowledge we acquire is through formal development, whether that be workshops, training sessions, formal online learning programs, a structured learning approach. Just 10% of the training, of the learning that we will take comes through this way. Then what you've got the informal learning. So this is about coaching, it's about reading, it's about informal online supported or self-directed learning. So if you watch a YouTube video, if you read an article on LinkedIn, if you read articles from other publications, that's what you would call self-directed learning. That's what is classed as informal learning. So when you're watching a video, when you're watching, you know, or reading an article or listening to a podcast even, that would be in that informal learning category. And 70% of the learning that we do is on the job learning. This is about the application of what we know. It's about shadowing other people, watching them do it, sitting with Nelly type approach, I think they used to call it. It's about allowing people to get things wrong and that learning and growth mindset in terms of playing that up. And of course, mentoring will sit in here because it is about the knowledge piece. Remember, we see coaching as more pure, where we can ask anybody any series of questions and allow them to move forward in terms of that, notwithstanding some of the technical coaching that we talked about earlier. The important consideration here for you guys is that 90% of learning is not derived through a formal course or training program. More than 2/3 is done on the job. This is where mentors actually play a really significant part because they're at the point where the learning is actually happening the most. And of course, you might supplement that with some coaching. You might supplement that with some additional content or knowledge or different viewpoints that might help them to understand the topic better. But fundamentally, most of this is done right under your noses as leaders within this business. So the good old, we'll send them on a course. Well, that's 10%. And actually, even if it's 10%, if they don't apply it, 90% is gone within a week. Not the best investment generally for organizations. So let's look at what it means to be an effective mentor. Now, we've got kind of 5 perspectives here for you to think about. One, it's about experience and expertise. Like we said, of the organization and the life experiences, and also a varied skill set. So those of you that have had a broader experience actually become potentially more powerful mentors because you've seen it from a broader spectrum, you've seen it from a wider perspective in terms of experience, in terms of how to get things done, how not to get things done, how to upset people, how to approach particular individuals and get them on side, all of which we've learned over time. Commitment and desire. This is about staying the course with the mentee. So we're not giving up on you. We are going to champion you as an individual. We're going to help you to be the best you can be. That's our responsibility as a mentor. We're going to help you in terms of becoming what you want. So this is about, back to your point earlier, Nick, around goals. What is it you want from your mentor? What is it you want to accomplish, become, have, or whatever it might be? Going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the call, it's about confidentiality and trust. And that's a two-way thing. So I want, as your mentee, I want to be absolutely comfortable that you've got my back. So anything we say doesn't leave the conversation. We don't go and share it and say, you never guess what these are thinking about and working on. You never guess who they've talked to and all of those things. So this is about a two-way trust. In the same way, when you help them to solve a particular problem, that might involve perhaps sharing something that may not normally be part of their day-to-day work. Actually, they need to know that this is confidential. You can't share this outside of the remit of this mentoring conversation. So we need to be clear what's in and what's out in terms of what's absolutely sacred and what we can talk about outside of this relationship. And it is about, you as a mentor, championing your mentee, making introductions. For me, like I said before, one of the most powerful parts of mentoring is helping them to understand how to get things done in the organization or with key stakeholders outside the organization. So if we've got, key relationships, let's talk about, maybe KFC or Burger King or wherever it might be, who might we go to provide insight about how to manage those conversations? Who might we talk to if we're going to talk to Starbucks, for example? So we need to understand, how do I facilitate an introduction for you if talking to an external provider or talking to one of the internal colleagues? What if you needed or wanted to speak to John, for example? Most would assume he's too busy, he's not going to have the time, and he's just never going to fit me into his busy schedule. Well, who could possibly facilitate that introduction? Now, we might have to have a strong, compelling reason to want to go and sit with John and talk to him about something. But what if you've got the next biggest idea? A mentor could help you with that process. Some can just go and knock on John's door and have the conversation comfortably because they've done their time and got the confidence of John. Now, the mentor's role is to champion their mentee in terms of that, or prepare them for that if they are determined to go and have that meeting, as an example, using that as an extreme. And of course, coming back full circle to what we were talking about earlier, and Stuart raised this point, which is around coaching, challenging, motivating. Our role as a mentor is to get the best out of the mentee. That's our role. So our job is to help the mentee get to where they want to get to. So what's their aspiration? What's their ambition? What's their level of growth? Where do they want to get to, and by when? What does that look like for them? That's the role of a mentor. Any thoughts, questions, observations, challenges?
I suppose the key bit for me, Ricky, that you just talked about is the trust element and the confidential conversation. Some of our guys, from Lead and Hypo, they need to start building those relationships and networking and knowing that they've got somebody in their corner. So being able to know and to appreciate that they've got a confidential conversation will mean a lot to them. So respecting those boundaries is massive. If I think of some of the things that, kind of when I was doing my coaching qualification, some of the things that I was privy to, it's a different hat you're wearing completely on that day. It's a coaching or a mentoring hat. It's not a head of whatever hat or a site leader hat. And we should be very respectful that they want us to be their mentor, because it's massive for some of these guys.
And I think that's absolutely right. I think this is a privileged position. Being asked to mentor is probably one of the greatest contributions you can make to an individual's career. Just, I've been fortunate to do this several times, and I look back and you go, look where they are now. And I look back almost, with a sense of, I'm an old man, but with a sense of pride around, it's all them, but all I was there was to kind of signpost, challenge, provoke, motivate, encourage, and just push them along a bit, and perhaps help them with some of that self-belief stuff. So a lot of the tools that many of you have gained over the Lead program will come to bear here. The expectations chat, if you remember that, the having the conversations around where their level of confidence is at and what's causing them to have those unhelpful thoughts, and how we might help flip those unhelpful thoughts into more helpful ones that means they can get out of their own way and move forward. So any others kind of, Catherine's called out confidential and trust. Any of the others that kind of resonate with anybody?
I just think maybe the introduction and the champion of people. I know you called out the commercial team, but equally with length of service comes a bigger network, I guess. So it's that responsibility of making sure that you're opening doors for people or showing them which doors to open. Sometimes it's not about opening it for them, but just saying, it's that signpost piece, try that door because there's some good people behind it or whatever, I don't know. But certainly that, if I think of my own personal journey, if I was to go back a few years ago, these are the kind of things that I would have felt a wee bit uncomfortable to do. So I think it's really important that, that's something that we really encourage and support with, because sometimes you've got, if you walk in the shoes, you've got a little bit of imposter syndrome, haven't you? So, to go and knock John's door 25 years ago, well, he'd probably still been at school, but I wouldn't have been that comfortable with that. whereas, you know, we need to be supporting that and all the things that you said. So I think we can add a lot of value around that in lots of roles. And the likes of the roles that we're in now, the likes of Michelle and I, we're kind of going across different divisions as well, and even different bits of water, because obviously we're in Northern Ireland as well. And where we've been sort of doing some coaching up to now with some people, we've actually tried to build that network of people in different situations. So we've all got experience of where that's added value to people as well. So there you go. That's
and I think I would completely agree, Caroline. And I think the power of your organisation is in the collective strength of using each other's intellectual knowledge, understanding, and how to get stuff done. Most of the impacts on productivity come because we second guess ourselves, we doubt ourselves, we don't want to impose on others. Well, the reality is, if we pick the phone up to each other and say, have you got a minute, then you're going to get one or two answers. The either is yes, but not now, or okay, let's talk about it, because most of us are not going to refuse a colleague's request for help or support, I would hope. And that's where the collective power and strength of the organisation comes from. And for me, it's a real differentiator in that using the power of all of your knowledge and skills, all of your different experiences, is one of the single biggest competitive advantages that most organisations never tap into. They never tap into it. And that's why, you know, your lead program in particular, where we get you to do the project, it's not because we necessarily want to make you work harder. Actually, we want you to apply what you've learned, but we want you to network and get a better understanding of the organisation, because those are real value adds for the organisation, but they're also massive value adds for you as individuals to help you get your job done simpler, more quickly, and more effectively. That's what it's all about. And I'm sure, you know, the same elements are part and parcel of the Hypo program. It's about being exposed to a wider group of people, your next generation of talent, and helping them, you know, helping each other to make that next step up, pushing each other, challenging each other, even if that's a little bit of friendly competition. All of that plays out. But what do you need to be an effective mentor? As a mentor, this is for you to do a little bit of introspection, a little bit of reflection that says, as a mentor, what are your strengths? So I'd invite you to grab a piece of paper and a pen and then just answer these questions for yourself, not for public consumption, but what are your strengths? What evidence do you have that supports that or validates that? What might you need to develop further, thinking through the lens of a mentor, this is. So as a mentor, where might you need to develop further? And what could you do to develop yourself? Right, okay. Let's draw that to a close. We'll make these slides available to you so that you can revisit that should you need to. The key question here is, I suppose, as a mentor, what additional help or support would you like, so that we can help you to be the best that you can be as a mentor? Now, if you look on the other side just briefly, you know, the questions I would have been asking mentees is, well, what do you want from your mentors? So that when you go into a mentor relationship, you at least have some visibility or some understanding of what you're looking for. Because one of the questions I would have as a mentor is, what do you need? What help do you want? So if we help them to do that thinking, that would be useful. How would we, how do they want this to work? How would you like them to support you? How would you like your mentor to support you? How would you like that relationship to work? Because we're all different. We all like different ways of working. Some like to be pushed, some like to be encouraged, some like to be gently nudged in the right direction. Some people like it straight between the eyes. So really is about you and what your needs are as a mentee. So think about, this is what mentees would be coming to you thinking about. And how would you like them to give you feedback? How does that look like? What do they want that feedback to be? Constructive, one would hope, specific, relevant, contextual, and one would hope, to use your word of earlier, Caroline, neutral, not biased one way or the other. It's very fair and understands the implications on, both the positives and negatives of what that might or may not look like. So if we can encourage our mentees to come prepared and forearmed, it means you get off to a much faster start in terms of that. Any coaching relationship, any mentor relationship usually works better when you've got some agreements and ground rules in place. And those ground rules have kind of two sides to them. One, some good stuff, and some potentially not so good stuff. But the advantage is around it adds structure. It highlights where the responsibilities and accountabilities sit. It agrees how you're going to work together, and it provides some clarity. But things to be careful of, things to be to watch out for, are it can make things too rigid if you get too constrained and too formalized in the way that you're going to work. You might get some pushback from the mentee because they feel that constraint, and mentor and mentee might not want this level of accountability, because as a mentee, there's an expectation that having used my time, you're going to do something with it. As a mentor, there's an expectation you're going to be there for me when I need you. And that, given the demanding and challenging nature of some of your roles, is not always easy. So be comfortable what you're signing up to, but this is a real value add to the organization. And I think something that's real value add to you as an individual. Not only it pushes through some of those imposter syndrome feelings that Caroline mentioned earlier, and in all honesty, if you got imposter syndrome, fake it till you make it, because that's kind of how you do it. You act as if you can do this, and it will become true. So act as if you are an accomplished mentor, because the reality is you probably almost certainly are anyway. So here's some things to think about in terms of the that agreement. Things to think about: wants, needs, and goals. Remember, this is about them and not you. How often are you going to meet? Who's got responsibility for what? Ways of behaving. How are we going to work together? How are we going to conduct ourselves in the meeting? Is this formal and professional? Is it an informal over a coffee? Let's talk it through. Let's just explore and see where this takes us. Or is there an endpoint? Do we need to get some elements of agreement in order to move forward? When is it okay to rearrange planned sessions? So is it lastminute.com? You've just, made somebody wait for your time, and then the mentee rings you up and says, sorry, I can't make it. Is that acceptable? And I think in the nature of your organization and the pace that you operate at, you need to have some rules around what's within the bounds of acceptability. We all accept that there are times when lastminute.com things happen. It's patterns and trends where we probably have a problem. And let's agree up front how we deal with conflicts and challenges within the relationship. Because if you deal with it up front, what I would lead you back to the expectations chat for those that were on the lead program, let's agree up front how we're going to deal with this. So when the time comes, because it may do, we know how to deal with it, and we've got some permission to deal with these things early on. It's not an exhaustive list, but at least it gives you some things to think about. Focus on the mentee. What do they want? How often are you going to meet? Who's taking responsibility for what? How are you going to work together? How are you going to deal with things that when they don't go right, meetings or challenges in the relationship? And don't be offended if you run off the edge of this and they don't want you as a mentor anymore. Don't be offended if they don't like your style and want somebody else. because they might just not. A mentor relationship and a coaching relationship, the chemistry has to be right. So if you're not getting on and it's not working, the mentee's not getting what they need from this, then give them the permission to say so, because that means that they won't feel trapped in a relationship because they feel they're obligated to. It's been set up for me. Give them that permission, that get out of jail free card that allows them to go and find a new mentor. Now, they might want some help with that. You might actually be able to signpost somebody you feel is more suitable to them based on your connected knowledge in the organisation. It serves neither of you any purpose if you're in a relationship that just doesn't necessarily get the right outcomes for each other, particularly the mentee in this case.
I think also in their classroom sessions and their Teams calls, if there isn't anything that isn't working, I'm sure I will find out along the way. So nobody needs to prolong a relationship that isn't working. Is my point. I would rather it worked than didn't. So if anything isn't working, we'll move it through quickly.
So it serves nobody any interest to be in a relationship, but sometimes it's about style, and that's fine. That doesn't mean that you are any less of a competent mentor. It doesn't mean that you can't add value to the organisation with somebody else, but it is about style. It is about how they gel with you and you with them. And the ones that are most productive are where you find a way to get the best out of each other. That doesn't mean being necessarily friends or best buddies, but what it does mean is the rules of engagement say, I want you to push me, I want you to challenge me, I want you to hold me to account. And if you live by that, then that's what they ask for, and that's what you do, which is why having these ground rules established up front are really important. And we would advocate that for coaching relationships as well. Before we engage in any coaching contracts in a little C term, we would always have a chemistry conversation. Do they like us? Do they like our style? We get to say what we think. And sometimes they pick me, sometimes they don't pick me, but I don't take it personally because I'm not the right style for them. So any questions, any things that are not on that list that you think should be on that list from the experience you've got within the organisation and perhaps from other organisations maybe? What are we missing?
I don't think, there isn't anything that I would say is missing. The thing I would say is, though, the frequency of meetings, although this relationship, as we all know, is led by the mentee, if the mentee comes to you and says, I only want to meet once a quarter, I would question whether they really want to get anything out of it. So for those that have been round and done this before, there'll be a little bit of jostling and pushing on my side to go, you need to own this, but you also need to do it often enough that it makes it worthwhile for everybody. So once a quarter or half a year or meeting twice or whatever doesn't really do anything. They've got to be in it to win it, as it were. So yes, they get to set it, but I would hope, I don't know, maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks at the most, just so that everybody gets something from it. Because it doesn't have to be face to face; it can be a Teams call just as much as it can be a coffee as well. Bearing in mind that
kind of my point, Catherine, was obviously just sort of a bit detailed, but adding to this is like, that it feels like it should be a blend of both, especially if there's a bit of distance between.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the frequency; it's the how, isn't it? Is it face to face? Is it? It maybe links into the styles then, because some people quite like doing team calls more often. But I suppose at some point you still really should be meeting up, I think, because if it's a valuable relationship, you kind of would want to. I know I'd certainly, as a mentor, want to make the effort to see that person face to face and be available. So,
but you've got, your diary is different to your mentee. You've got, a company car that helps you get up and about and stuff. So we just need to be wary that not everybody's got the same freedoms that some of us have got, but that blended approach will work really well. And they'll want to meet you face to face. They'll want to impress you, but it's about being the senior person and saying, we don't have to do everything in Newport. We can, meet at Abington, or we can, but but yeah.
But I think that comes back to, how do we get the best out of this relationship? In the same way that being together every week is not going to get the best out of you, because anything you talk about is not going to give me an opportunity to go and apply it anyway. Unless actually we go, next week I need to get in front of, and you might have a touch base thing that just lasts 10 minutes, 15 minutes. How did you get on? What did you learn? What else could you have done? All of those types of things. So you're flipping in and out of the question routine around that, and supporting them post activity or whatever you've agreed that they'll go and do. So I think, you're all bright enough to work out that common sense prevails here, right? So, don't go charging up and down the country unless you need to. But I think having a nice mix of some face-to-face, some Teams calls, phone calls, even when with my mentor, when I was growing up in black and white, we used to have to do good old-fashioned phone call, and it used to be on the drive home, the good old-fashioned drive home when we used to have them, and that was my time to touch base, to touch in, and that was what worked for me at that particular time. So don't be constrained. Think outside the box in terms of what's going to work for you and the mentor, the mentee in this case. So last thing, expectations of a welcome break mentor are, for those that have been involved in lead, we want your help supporting the lead groups, in particular around their projects. So you guys know how easy, hard, difficult, challenging, stretching that these can be, and we're doing the same with them. They're not on as long a lead time as you guys were. They're on a 90-day challenge, so they're in the middle of that right now in terms of cohort 5. Cohort 6 will kick off again in September. We want you to help all of the mentees that you're involved with find access to the required and relevant stakeholders needed to help them move forward. Use your knowledge, experience, help your mentees to navigate the challenges they face in the day job. And we'd like, ideally, for these relationships to last a year or so. Now, I would suggest that if you've got a relationship that works and they're comfortable and it goes beyond that, I'm imagining that would be all right, Catherine?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and there are some people that are here because they've already got a relationship with somebody, and it was silly to break that relationship for the sake of it. Perfect. So there's a really good mix on this call. So yeah.
And we're talking about, we said before, give a little bit back to others. A mentee today is a mentor of tomorrow. So the help that you give them, they will be able to pay it forward when they get their chance to be a mentor too. So those that have been mentored are now paying that forward, etc., etc. So, and utilize the resources and tools that you have within the business that you can find on the hub. And should this have been on the highway or on highway? Is highway something else that you've added in?
Highway, yes, it's our new LMS platform.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
So is this replaced Jam?
No.
Oh.
It's going to replace Learning in its entirety next month. So, but the hypos will almost certainly get all of any e-learning and stuff that they've got to do will go straight onto Highway. So we won't utilise Learning now for any new stuff. It'll go straight onto Highway. So if anyone needs any help or support with that, give us a shout.